There are moments in life that stick with you, not because they're grand or dramatic, but because they reveal something about people, about power, and sometimes about yourself. For me, that moment came in the form of a laugh. Not a warm laugh, not the kind that follows a shared joke between coworkers. This one was different, cold, surgical, laced with contempt. It came from a man I barely knew, Jackson Carter, the son of Eastbridge Technologies founder and the newly appointed acting CEO. I'd been with Eastbridge for over 14 years. I had seen the company ride the highs of an IPO and survive the lows of 2 market crashes. I'd stayed when competitors offered more, fought to keep my team afloat during layoffs, and spent too many nights in a lonely office under the hum of fluorescent lights. But all of that didn't matter the day Jackson walked into our break room. It was a Tuesday morning, overcast and heavy with the kind of quiet that usually signals change. I was at the coffee station, pouring myself a bitter cup from a half-burnt pot, mentally preparing for another long day of numbers, clients, and quiet problem-solving. That's when the door swung open, and Jackson strolled in like he owned the place. And technically, now he did. He didn't greet anyone, didn't introduce himself, just stood there with his arms folded across his chest, eyes sweeping the room like he was scanning a menu. His tailored suit, expensive watch, and posture screamed entitlement. The rest of us were invisible to him. "You're Daniel, right?" he asked flatly, not even bothering to fake interest. I turned to face him, offering a measured smile. "Yes, I am. Welcome aboard." He gave a half smirk, not looking me in the eye. "My office. 10 minutes. Bring your laptop." It wasn't a request. It was a command. The kind that told you right away this guy didn't ask, he told. He didn't consider, he decided. And if you didn't like it, well, that was your problem, not his. As he walked out, I stood there for a moment, still holding my cup. Something twisted in my gut. I'd seen executives like him before, fresh out of grad school, armed with buzzwords, blind ambition, and a dangerous lack of humility. But this felt different. This wasn't just about generational arrogance. There was something colder in the way he moved, something calculated. I went back to my desk and sat down slowly, the familiar hum on my monitors suddenly feeling distant. 10 minutes. That was all the time I had to process the fact that this might be the end of something. And I didn't even know why yet. As I walked to the elevator, laptop under my arm, I caught the nervous glance of Julia from HR. She quickly looked away. That was all the confirmation I needed. Jackson's office was bright, modern, sterile, like something out of tech startup catalog. He didn't offer me a seat, just gestured to the desk as he tapped a silver pen like it was a gavel. "We're streamlining," he said, eyes on his tablet. "New leadership, new structure. We need teams that are lean, flexible, future-focused. You're not essential." He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Then he looked up, smirked, and laughed. That laugh, it cut through me more than the words did. Like this wasn't real life, just another move in some corporate chess game. He thought he was winning. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not fear, just clarity. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and looked him square in the eyes. "Good luck, Jackson." He blinked, caught off guard by how calm I was. I meant it, but not in the way he thought, because what he didn't know, what he hadn't even bothered to learn, was that the decision he just made wasn't just reckless. It was fatal, and the fallout would start in less than 24 hours. I walked out of Jackson's office with steady steps and a face like stone. I didn't let the anger show. I didn't give him the satisfaction. The hallway was quiet, but I could feel eyes on me. From behind cubicle walls, across glass dividers, in the slight hush that always follows bad news. People knew. They didn't say anything, of course. No one does in places like this. In the corporate world, silence is a currency, cheap to spend, but costly to run out of. They watched, then quickly looked away, retreating into the safety of their spreadsheets and Slack threads. I couldn't blame them. Everyone here had their own quiet fear of being next. I reached my desk and opened the same drawers I'd opened every morning for over a decade. My nameplate still sat at the corner. Daniel Cole, Director of Strategic Accounts, a little scratched, a little faded, but still mine. I placed it gently into the cardboard box HR had left by my chair. 12 years. Gone in 10 minutes. I kept my movements methodical. Pulled the photo of my daughter from the tackboard. Removed the worn fountain pen my father gave me the day I got promoted to senior manager. Closed the folder of pending contracts I'd planned to finish that week. Behind me, someone whispered, "Jesus," and then silence again. I didn't turn around. I finished packing in under 5 minutes. I didn't take much. Most of what mattered was either in my head or burned into long nights of sacrifice. You don't pack memories into boxes. They follow you whether you want them to or not. As I walked to the elevator, the box cradled in my arms, it hit me how much I'd given this company. How many birthdays I missed. How many late nights I stayed behind to revise proposals, to rescue falling deals, to soothe angry clients. I once missed my own divorce hearing because the executive team needed me on a call with investors in Tokyo. And now, to them, I was just non-essential. It wasn't the firing that stung. It was the indifference. The ease with which a stranger could look at over a decade of loyalty and dismiss it like a line item. Jackson hadn't asked what I did. He didn't ask what I was working on. He didn't ask who I was. He just made a call. But that's the thing about arrogance. It's blind. And Jackson had just fired a man whose absence would echo louder than he could imagine. Because what he didn't realize, and what no one told him, was that I wasn't just a strategic accounts guy. I was the only person Arden Capital trusted at Eastbridge. The only reason they hadn't walked away from the negotiation table already. This deal, the one Jackson probably bragged about in his first executive meeting, was built on handshakes, midnight calls, mutual respect earned over 3 years of patient diplomacy. It wasn't numbers in a deck. It was relationships. Human ones. Fragile. Priceless. And I had protected that relationship like it was my own company on the line. Because to me it was. Sitting in my car, staring through the windshield at the gray sky above the parking lot, I felt something strange. Not grief. Not even rage. Just a sharp, quiet certainty. Like a click in the back of my mind. Jackson had made a mistake. And the worst part? He didn't even know it yet. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I sat in my car, parked at the far end of the Eastbridge parking lot, watching the office windows from a distance. People moved inside like they always did. Routine, safe, oblivious. The world didn't stop spinning just because mine had. But something had shifted. That laugh, the one Jackson let out after firing me, was still ringing in my ears. Not because it hurt. No, that sound was fuel now. A trigger. A reminder. Because he didn't just fire a manager. He fired the one person Arden Capital trusted to guide their investment through the thicket of legal clauses, legacy systems, and corporate egos. He fired the man who had personally negotiated the most important section of the preliminary agreement. The clause Jackson had clearly never bothered to read. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was worn at the edges from weeks of review, revision, and middle-of-the-night note-taking. Page 17. Section 4B. I knew it by heart. Any change to key personnel related to investment structuring, client relations, or strategic decision-making shall require prior notification and renegotiation. Failure to comply may result in full withdrawal by investor with no penalty incurred. I had fought like hell to get that in. Arden's legal team was hesitant, but I had insisted. Because I knew companies like Eastbridge. I knew how easy it was for new leadership to bulldoze the people who actually held the walls up. And now, with one arrogant decision, Jackson had tripped the wire. And the countdown had begun. At 6:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. Rachel, Investor Relations. Daniel. I just heard. Is it true? I typed back 2 words. Me. It's true. There was a pause. Then another buzz. Rachel. You were the reason Arden even considered this deal. Not Jackson. Not this company. You. I stared at the message for a long time. She was right. But what hit me more wasn't her praise. It was the fact that someone noticed. So much of my work had been invisible, behind closed doors, on planes, in conference calls at 3 a.m. while others slept. I never asked for attention. I just got things done. And now all that quiet strength was about to become very, very loud. At 6:43 p.m., another message came in, this time from Mason in finance. Mason, Board just got wind of what happened. Investors are asking questions. Jackson's scrambling. I couldn't help it. I smiled. Not out of revenge, but because for the first time in a long time, the truth was doing the talking. I started my engine and drove home. The lights of the city flashing past like ghosts of all the hours I had given to a company that didn't know how to value people who didn't shout. By the time I got to my apartment, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to crawl away from this. I wasn't going to let Jackson rewrite my legacy with a shrug and a spreadsheet. No, if they wanted to learn the cost of ignorance, they were about to get the full invoice. With interest, I poured myself a drink, opened my laptop, and began writing a single-page memo. Not for the board, not for Jackson, but for me. A record of what I knew, what I had done, and what I was about to do next. Because I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I woke up before the sun. Not because I was anxious. Not even because I was angry. I just felt ready. The kind of readiness that comes from knowing something inevitable is about to happen. A reckoning. The kind of shift that doesn't whisper, it roars. I brewed coffee in silence. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you when your mind is already miles ahead of the day. The mug sat untouched on the kitchen table as I scrolled through news alerts, emails, and company chatter. Nothing yet. No explosions. No fire. Just the usual hum of corporate noise. But I knew better. These things don't announce themselves with sirens. They start quietly, an email thread here, a calendar shift there, and then suddenly the building shakes. At 9:20 a.m., my phone lit up. Rachel again. Her message was short, but it was the spark. They're panicking. Legal called an emergency meeting. Jackson's been in the conference room since 8:40. Investors are dialing in at 10. I stared at her words for a long second, then set the phone down. This wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was inevitability. This was what happened when you fire people like they're broken parts. You forget the system runs on relationships, not just revenue. And now Jackson, with all his degrees and buzzwords, was about to learn what it costs to cut the wrong connection. By 9:50, the messages started piling in. Mason from finance. Board members already on edge. Arden's legal just sent a memo. They've triggered the clause. The clause. That single line in the contract I had fought for. That no one else had read because no one thought it would ever matter. But I knew better. People like Jackson always assume they're the smartest in the room until they learn the hard way that paperwork and power are not the same thing. At 10:18, Rachel messaged again. Investors are on the call. Jackson's stammering. He doesn't know how to answer. Mr. Carter just walked in. That made me pause. Richard Carter, the founder, the man who had built Eastbridge from a two-man startup in Austin into a national force. He'd stepped back years ago, left the day-to-day to executives while he traveled between international branches. He wasn't supposed to be in the office, which meant only one thing. He'd heard. And if he was there in person, that wasn't concern. That was crisis. At 10:35, Rachel sent one more message. This one took a moment to open because my hands weren't as steady as I thought. He yelled at Jackson, in front of everyone, said, "That man was the key to everything. You fired the one person holding this place together." And that was it. The moment. The shift. The collision between ego and consequence. The thing about power is that it doesn't shout. It reveals. And in that conference room, with the board on one line and investors on the other, Jackson was being stripped bare. He had laughed when he fired me, mocked me, treated me like a line item in a quarterly report. And now, less than 24 hours later, the billion-dollar deal he thought would define his legacy was slipping through his fingers like sand. I didn't feel glee. I didn't fist pump or shout or even smile. I just sat there, watching the light shift across the wall, and let the moment land. This wasn't just about a deal. This wasn't even about me. This was about truth. And truth, when it shows up, doesn't knock. It breaks down the door. At 10:40, my phone rang. Unknown number. But I already knew. I let it ring once. Twice. Then picked up. "Daniel Cole," I said. A beat of silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years. "Daniel, it's Richard Carter." His voice was tight, clipped, a man trying to sound composed while the floor cracked beneath him. "I need to speak with you. Today." I said nothing. Let the silence stretch just long enough to sting. About what? I asked, even though we both already knew. The Art and Capital deal, he replied. They're reconsidering. They've cited a personnel violation and want to meet with you. Only you. They won't speak to anyone else. I leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. You didn't ask, I said simply. You didn't ask who I was before you erased me. He exhaled. Long, quiet. Heavy. You're right. He paused. I thought Jackson was ready. He's not, I said. Not even close. Another pause. Then he asked what I was waiting for. Will you come in? Just to stabilize this? I'll stay out of it. You'll deal with me directly. Not Jackson. He didn't beg, but he wasn't far from it either. I could hear it. The weight of reputation, of legacy, of all the things he had tried to hand to his son now unraveling in real time. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see it. I'll come in, I said, but on my terms. No interference. No oversight. If I'm going to say what he broke, I do it my way. Agreed, he said with zero hesitation. And just like that, the tide turned. Not with a headline, not with applause, but with a phone call, a voice, and a choice. I stood up, finished my now cold coffee, and got dressed. Not in business armor, not in desperation, but in quiet strength. Because today, I wasn't returning to prove anything. I was returning to remind them who they had forgotten, and to show them what it costs to underestimate the man who laid the foundation they all stood on. The lobby looked the same. Too clean, too bright. Sunlight pouring in through tall glass windows, bouncing off polished marble like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I wasn't walking in with a badge clipped to my belt or a laptop slung over my shoulder. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a variable no one had accounted for. A storm wrapped in a suit. The receptionist glanced up, startled. She straightened instantly. Mr. Cole? Daniel, Mr. Carter's expecting you. 12th floor. Her voice trailed off, like she wasn't sure what I was anymore. Neither was the company. They made two of us. I nodded, said nothing, and stepped into the elevator. The metal doors closed with a soft hush, and for a moment, I caught my reflection in the mirrored surface. Eyes sharp, shoulders squared, calm but unreadable. Not cold, just finished with the illusion of needing to be liked. This time, I wasn't climbing any ladder. I was the damn architect. When the elevator opened, the entire energy shifted. The 12th floor had always been quieter, more clinical, where decisions were made far above the noise. But today, the silence wasn't calm. It was tense. People glanced up and quickly looked away. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A senior VP adjusted his tie and turned his back, pretending to read a memo that didn't exist. They knew. They all knew. And then I saw him, Jackson, standing near the glass conference room like he still ran the place. Arms crossed, posture stiff, try to laugh at something a junior associate had just said. His smirk cracked the moment he saw me. His face paled just for a second, but he covered it quickly with that same performative arrogance. Well, look who's back, he called out, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. Couldn't stay away, huh? I didn't stop, didn't glance in his direction, didn't even blink. I just walked past him, every step echoing softly on the hardwood floor. Let him squirm. Let him wonder. His words couldn't touch me anymore. Not after what he'd broken. Not after the calls, the claws, and the very public unraveling of the image he had worked so hard to fake. Mr. Carter stood outside his office, waiting. He looked older now, tired in a way even the most expensive suit couldn't hide. When he offered his hand, I shook it, firmly but without warmth. This wasn't a reunion. This was a transaction. Daniel, he said quietly. Let's get to it, I replied. Inside, the office overlooked the skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs, polished wood, and 1,000 small reminders of who used to sit at the top. He gestured toward the seat across from his desk. I sat without a word. I'm sorry, he began, for how this was handled. You didn't deserve that. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of it fill the room. Then I gave a single nod. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. He slid a file across the table. Inside, meeting notes, panicked emails, a printout of the clause I had written. Highlighted, circled, underlined. A mess of desperation and disbelief. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what was inside. The price of arrogance. The cost of firing a man without asking what he'd built. I'll speak to Arden, I said, but I want it in writing. Full authority. No interference. Especially not from your son. Without hesitation, he reached into a drawer and produced a letter already printed, signed, and waiting. I read it carefully. Every word, every clause. It was all there. I signed. And finally, I breathed. Before he could even reach for the phone, a loud knock shattered the stillness. The door swung open. Jackson stormed in. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're going to let him?" "Enough," Mr. Carter cut in, voice sharp as a blade. Jackson froze. "I trusted you," he said, not with anger, but with disappointment so thick it choked the room. "I trusted you to lead, to learn. But you treated this company like a toy, and you broke it." Jackson opened his mouth, but his father didn't let him speak. "You fired the one person keeping this place together. You didn't even read the contracts. You let your ego destroy the foundation." Silence. Pure. Heavy. Devastating. "You're suspended," Mr. Carter said. "Effective immediately. Legal has the paperwork." For a moment, Jackson just stood there, red-faced, frozen. Then he turned to me, rage barely held in check. "This isn't over," he hissed. I didn't respond, because he wasn't worth the breath. When he slammed the door behind him, the room finally exhaled. Mr. Carter slumped into his chair, as if the last 36 hours had collapsed onto his shoulders all at once. "I should have seen it coming," he muttered. "Blind faith is dangerous," I said softly, "especially when it blinds you to the truth." He nodded, slowly, like every word weighed 100 pounds. Then he reached for the speakerphone, fingers trembling slightly. And I sat straighter, because I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me. Because strength doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing exactly where you belong and making damn sure they see it. The moment the speakerphone clicked on, the room shifted. It didn't matter that we were seated in a private executive office with skyline views and leather chairs. That soft click was louder than any slam of a boardroom door. This wasn't a call. It was a verdict. There was a pause, too long to be comfortable. Then, the sound of shuffling papers, hushed voices in the background, a distant cough. And finally, a voice I knew well. "Daniel," said Henry Lewis, lead partner at Arden Capital. His tone was calm, but distant. Not angry. Worse, cold. "We were surprised to hear about your departure." I didn't look at Mr. Carter. I kept my eyes forward, my voice steady. "My departure," I said clearly, "was not voluntary. And it wasn't part of any strategic adjustment. You can trust that." Silence followed. Not emptiness, but weight. Like they were measuring my voice, my words, my presence, deciding if I still held the credibility this deal was built on. My hand stayed still on the table, but my spine locked into place. "You were the backbone of this negotiation," Henry continued. "Our confidence in Eastbridge came largely from your involvement. Without you," he let the implication hang. "You were right to feel that way," I said, "and I still take that responsibility seriously." Another pause, and then the second voice joined. Sharper, female, one I hadn't expected but instantly recognized. "Christina Bailey, Chief Legal Counsel," she said briskly. "I've reviewed the preliminary contract. Section 4B gives us full legal right to withdraw, no penalty." "I understand," I replied evenly. Because I did. She let that breathe for a second, then continued, more measured this time. "However, we also recognize that mistakes happen. If Daniel remains primary liaison, with full contractual authority, we are willing to move forward." My chest didn't rise. My heart didn't race. I had prepared for this moment, but I also knew better than to believe it came without strings. "On one condition," she added. I leaned forward slightly, voice calm. "What condition?" "That Eastbridge issues a formal acknowledgement of the error," she said, "and reaffirms the leadership continuity clause in writing." I didn't have to look at Mr. Carter to know he was already nodding. This was the price of arrogance, the fine for blind faith, the tax on letting a child lead a company built by grown men and women who bled for it. "You'll have it by end of day," I said. There was a pause, and then Henry's voice returned, softer now. "In that case, were willing to continue. The tension in the room broke like glass. Mr. Carter exhaled deeply, almost sinking into his chair. But I didn't move. Not yet. Not until I was done. "Thank you, Daniel," Henry said. "We trusted you, and you reminded us why." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "My job hasn't changed," I said. "Only the room I'm doing it from." The call ended with a soft beep. No applause. No celebration. Just the quiet hum of relief settling over everything like dust. Mr. Carter looked at me, his voice low. "You saved us." I stood slowly, closed the folder in front of me, and met his eyes. "I didn't do it for you," I said. "I did it for the people this company forgot." He swallowed hard. "You deserve better." "I know." I turned to leave. Then he spoke again. "Stay," he said. "Not just to fix this. To lead." I paused, hand on the door. "I'll think about it," I said. "But if I come back, it's on my terms. No more silent work. No more credit taken by people who've never bled for this company. And no more pretending there's no difference between earned power and inherited power." He nodded slowly, like he finally understood what had always been right in front of him. I stepped out of the office and into the hallway, where the noise of the floor resumed like distant thunder. Behind me, Jackson's office sat empty. Ahead of me, the company's future waited. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't walking toward uncertainty. I was walking toward a place I had already earned. The memo went out at 3:12 p.m. sharp. Dry, professional, efficient, just like all company announcements. Effective immediately, Daniel Cole will serve as interim head of strategic operations, overseeing key account relations and investor engagement. No big meeting. No company-wide speech. Just a single email, sent quietly but landing like thunder. I didn't need fanfare. I didn't need the applause. But I knew what that message meant. It meant I was back. But I also knew something else, something colder. In a place like Eastbridge, a win is never the end. It's just the start of a new kind of war. And wars don't end because you remove the general. They continue through lieutenants, loyalists, and whispers in quiet corridors. Jackson may have been suspended, but his presence hadn't vanished. It lingered in glances, in silence, in the way a conversation suddenly stops when you enter a room. He still had people here. People who owed him favors, who believed in his promises, who feared losing whatever they had gained by siding with him. I saw in the way HR flinched when I walked by. I saw it in the way one of the executive assistants whispered into her phone as soon as I left the meeting room. I saw it in the way data started arriving a few minutes late, incomplete, or not at all. That night, as the office emptied out, I stayed. Not because I had work to catch up on. I stayed because I needed to listen. Watch. Feel the tension beneath the surface. I walked past the break room, silent now, but still carrying the ghost of the day before. That was where Jackson had left. That was where this all began. And as I passed, I heard it. Two voices. Low. Tense. Coming from the hallway, just beyond the copier room. "She won't last," someone whispered. "Jackson still has pull. He's not done. She's a problem now. Too much attention. They didn't know I was there." I didn't stop. I didn't confront them. I didn't need to. I walked straight ahead, steps calm, but my mind racing. They were wrong about one thing. I wasn't a problem. I was the consequence. When I got home, I didn't collapse into bed or pour a drink. I sat at my kitchen table, pulled out a notebook, and began to write. Not feelings. Not plans. Evidence. I wrote down everything. Times, names, incidents. Delays that didn't make sense. Documents that were suddenly missing. Meeting requests that were mysteriously canceled. And every word I had overheard since returning. Every small crack in the system Jackson once ruled that was now quietly resisting my presence. Because cutting off the head doesn't cure the rot. You have to dig it out, piece by piece. By midnight, I had 10 pages. By dawn, 12. The next morning, I sent a request to systems for a full audit. Then I forwarded a copy of the Arden contract clause to legal with a footnote. Review internal compliance risk. Flag any deviation. I copied HR. I copied finance. And most importantly, I kept every receipt. When the HR meeting invite came through 2 hours later, subject line, review of leadership transitions, internal concerns, I didn't panic. I smiled. I walked into the conference room 20 minutes early, sat at the far end of the long glass table, notebook in hand, and waited. The room was cold, harshly lit, empty, just the way I liked it. Then they arrived. 3 HR reps, all overly polite, and trailing behind them like a ghost no one had invited. Jackson, smiling. Of course. He wasn't done. But this time neither was I. The door shut behind them with a soft click, but the air snapped tight the moment Jackson stepped in. He wasn't supposed to be here. The meeting invite had listed 3 HR reps, no one else. But of course, Jackson didn't follow structure. He never had. He came in smiling, arrogant as ever, as if the suspension was just a temporary nuisance, not a reckoning. That same smirk stretched across his face like a mask that was starting to crack. I stayed seated, calm, collected, let him have his moment. The lead HR rep, a woman named Karen with an expression too rehearsed to be natural, opened a manila folder. Daniel, thank you for coming. We've had some concerns brought to our attention over the past 48 hours regarding your leadership style and interactions with certain departments. I tilted my head slightly. Concerns? Next to her, Emma, someone I had known for nearly a decade, refused to meet my eyes. That told me everything. She hadn't started this, but she was here to finish it whether she liked it or not. Jackson leaned forward just slightly, his voice syrupy sweet. There's been some chatter, about whether your aggressive management approach is destabilizing to the company culture. It's raised some flags. Aggressive. That was the angle. It always is. Take a decisive person, a strong presence, and paint them unstable. Turn confidence into threat. Results into recklessness. It's a tactic as old as office politics itself. I gave a slow nod, then opened the leather notebook I'd brought with me and placed a neatly clipped stack of printed pages on the table. Before we go any further, I said, voice clear and smooth, I'd like to submit this documentation for the record. All 3 HR reps blinked. Jackson's smile faltered for half a second. I slid the papers across the table, 15 pages of detailed notes. Dates, times, email chains that were delayed or mysteriously rerouted, meeting invites deleted, files edited and re-uploaded under the same name, but with missing content. Whisper campaigns tracked back to departments where Jackson had longtime allies. I've also flagged 2 potential security breaches, both of which I reported to systems 2 weeks ago. I added, here are the confirmation emails. And here is a printed audit trail of every action that's taken place around the Crestmont file since my departure and return. Silence. Karen blinked. You already reported this? Of course, I said. I take my responsibilities seriously. I wasn't going to return and hope everything sorted itself out. Jackson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The trap had already closed. Emma finally looked up. Her face had changed. Not surprised. Something else. Respect. Or maybe relief. She had seen this play out before. Good people taken down by quieter, slimier hands. But not this time. I leaned back slightly, watching Jackson's face morph from smug to confused to pale. Because now he wasn't just trying to undercut me with gossip. He had walked into a room where everything he thought he could control was documented, verified, and backed by signatures. Karen cleared her throat. Daniel, we weren't aware of any of this. These are serious issues. I nodded once. Yes, that's why I flagged them before you even scheduled this meeting. Right then, Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Her eyebrows lifted. Mr. Carter is asking to join, she said aloud, her voice a mix of confusion and alarm. Jackson stiffened. The door opened quietly, and Richard Carter stepped in. He looked at the room, at the stack of papers, at his son, and he understood. He didn't need anyone to explain. Not with the look on Jackson's face. I think this meeting is over, he said. Calm. Cold. Dad. Jackson started, desperate. No, Richard said, his voice firmer now. You're done. There was no shouting, no slamming fists, just that final sentence, delivered with the kind of weight that doesn't need to be loud to be permanent. That afternoon, HR escorted Jackson out of the building. No farewell speech, no email blast, no legacy, just silence. And me? I stayed. Not because I had something to prove, but because the people worth protecting deserved to see what real leadership looked like. Leadership didn't mean surviving the storm. It meant knowing where to stand after it passed. The building didn't feel different at first. Same lights, same elevator ding, same stale air in the corridors. But change doesn't always arrive like a crash of thunder. Sometimes it creeps in through the cracks, soft as dust, steady as breath. After Jackson was gone, no one said anything. No one celebrated. No one whispered, "Finally," or passed knowing looks. Because everyone knew what it meant to survive someone like him. You don't cheer when the fire goes out. You just take inventory of what's left. I didn't call a town hall. Didn't give some inspirational speech. I didn't believe in pretending that one signature on an HR form could heal what had been festering for years. East Bridge had rotted quietly, under layers of forced smiles, empty metrics, and people too afraid to tell the truth. Jackson didn't invent the disease. He just accelerated it. So I started where rot begins, in the places no one looks. I walked the floors, not in a suit, not as a symbol, but as a man with his sleeves rolled and his eyes wide open. I sat with the client service team, asked questions without taking notes, spoke to interns, listened more than I talked. I didn't ask how people were feeling. I asked what had stopped them from speaking up, and they told me. They told me about meetings where credit vanished mysteriously from their hands, about ideas stolen and repackaged, about raises promised and never delivered, about working weekends to make up for decisions made 5 floors above them without a single consultation. They didn't cry. They didn't complain. They just finally spoke, like people who'd been waiting for years to be asked a real question. I started cleaning house, not with firings, but with structure. No more closed-door promotions. No more data hoarding. No more don't ask, just do. Every department head had to submit a breakdown of who was doing the work versus who was getting the credit. And if that didn't match, they had a choice, fix it or step aside. Some left, quietly. Some stayed and got louder, in a good way. A week after Jackson's departure, someone left a note on my desk. Handwritten. No name. Just 2 lines. I don't know if it's real yet. But for the first time in years, I'm not afraid to speak. That was all I needed to know. I didn't respond. I didn't try to guess who sent it. I just folded it once and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket. That note wasn't praise. It was a promise. If they could trust me to hear them, I had to be strong enough to protect that voice, even when the silence around it gets loud again. Because it always does. Change threatens comfort, and comfort never gives up its seat willingly. By the 3rd week, old patterns started fighting back. Middle managers delaying decisions. Emails worded just vague enough to dodge responsibility. Microaggressions in meetings. A few whispered jokes about how Cole's crusade would pass once the investors calmed down. I noticed. I remembered. I documented. Because this time, I wasn't going to react when a knife showed up. I was going to move before it ever left their hand. The rot hadn't been cleared. It had just scattered. And now, I was the one with the light. The meeting room was full. Not packed, but full of the right people. Senior leads from every department. Legal, finance, product, HR, even the skeptical ones. The ones who had stayed silent during Jackson's rise, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Now they were all here, watching me like someone watching the tide, unsure if it would rise or retreat. I didn't stand at the front. I didn't pace or raise my voice. I simply sat, leaned forward, and said what needed to be said. This company doesn't need saving. It needs remembering. Silence. Remember who actually built our biggest accounts, not who smiled at the signing ceremony. Remember who stayed until 11 p.m. on launch night while someone else wrote the press release. Remember who walked away quietly after being passed over again and again because they didn't play politics. I let the words settle, not to impress, but to dislodge the denial. We don't rebuild by chasing image. We rebuild by rewarding substance. No slides, no mission statement, just truth. Then I pulled out a single sheet of paper. A list, not of promotions, of people, names that had appeared again and again in the notes I had taken over the past month. The doers, the silenced, the overlooked. I read each one aloud, slowly. Some people blinked. Some looked down. Some smiled, faint and cautious, like maybe just maybe this was real. I ended the meeting with one line. Starting next week, titles don't determine influence. Results do. You have 2 weeks to submit your department restructure plans. No middle layers. No legacy seats. Prove who belongs or step aside. Then I stood up and left. No applause. No nods. Just stillness. And it was enough. That night, I walked the halls again. The lights were dimmed, the office humming with its usual quiet after-hours rhythm. But it felt different. Not safe. Nothing ever is in a place like this, but honest. I passed the glass wall of the conference room where Jackson once laughed, where I had been erased with a smirk, where people had whispered behind doors, thinking I wouldn't hear. No one laughed anymore. In a corner of the break room, someone had left another note. This one in sign, taped to the cabinet. We see you, and we're still here. I folded it gently, put it in the same pocket as the first. Then I opened a new file on my computer and titled it, Legacy. Not for me. For everyone who had ever been told they were too quiet, too calm, too invisible to matter. And for every executive who ever thought leadership was about noise instead of weight. This wasn't my comeback. This was my confirmation. The throne wasn't loud. It wasn't gold. It wasn't handed down. It was built quietly, brick by brick, from everything I refused to let them take from me. And now I sat in it, not to rule, but to make sure no one like Jackson ever rose again on the bones of people better than him. The war was over, but the work was just beginning. If you've ever been told you were replaceable, if you've ever stayed silent while someone else took the credit, if you've ever walked away from a job, not because you weren't good enough, but because someone was too blind to see it, then this story was for you. Leadership isn't about titles. Power isn't about noise. And real worth? It doesn't need to scream to be heard. If you felt that, if you've lived that, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true, powerful stories that remind us all. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand your ground in silence. We've got more stories coming that speak directly to people like you. The quiet builders, the behind-the-scenes fighters, the ones who never needed a stage to have impact. This is your place, your voice, your moment. Subscribe now, because the next story might just be yours.